Chapter 42 of Sylvia's Lovers by Elizabeth Gaskell. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Read by Terence Callan. Chapter 42, A Fable at Fault. Philip took possession of the 2 rooms which had belonged to the dead Sergeant Dobson. They were furnished sufficiently for every comfort by the trustees of the hospital. Some little fragments of ornament, some small articles picked up in distant countries, a few tattered books, remained in the rooms as legacies from their former occupant. At first the repose of the life and the place was inexpressibly grateful to Philip. He had always shrunk from encountering strangers and displaying his blackened and scarred countenance to them, even where such disfigurement was most regarded as a mark of honor. In St. Sepulchre's he met none but the same set day after day, and when he had once told the tale of how it happened and submitted to their gaze, it was over forever, if he so minded. The slight employment his garden gave him — there was a kitchen garden behind each house, as well as the flower plot in front — and the daily arrangement of his parlor and chamber were, at the beginning of his time of occupation, as much bodily labor as he could manage. There was something stately and utterly removed from all Philip's previous existence in the forms observed at every day's dinner, when the 12 bedesmen met in the large quaint hall, and the warden came in his college cap and gown to say the long Latin grace, which wound up with something very like a prayer for the soul of Sir Simon Bray. It took some time to get a reply to ship letters in those times, when no one could exactly say where the fleet might be found. And before Dr. Pennington had received the excellent character of Stephen Freeman, which his son gladly sent in answer to his father's inquiries, Philip had become restless and uneasy in the midst of all this peace and comfort. Sitting alone over his fire in the long winter evenings, the scenes of his past life rose before him: his childhood, his Aunt Robson's care of him, his first going to Foster's shop in Monkshaven, Haytersbank Farm and the spelling lessons in the bright warm kitchen there, Kinraid's appearance, the miserable night of the Cornies' party, the farewell he had witnessed on Monkshaven sands, the press gang, and all the long consequences of that act of concealment, poor Daniel Robson's trial and execution, his own marriage, his child's birth, and then he came to that last day at Monkshaven, and he went over and over again the torturing details, the looks of contempt and anger, the words of loathing indignation, till he almost brought himself, out of his extreme sympathy with Sylvia, to believe that he was indeed the wretch she had considered him to be. He forgot his own excuses for having acted as he had done, though these excuses had at one time seemed to him to wear the garb of reasons. After long thought and bitter memory came some wonder. What was Sylvia doing now? Where was she? What was his child like? His child as well as hers. And then he remembered the poor footsore wife and the little girl she carried in her arms that was just the age of Bella. He wished he had noticed that child more, that a clear vision of it might rise up when he wanted to picture Bella. One night he had gone round this mill-wheel circle of ideas till he was weary to the very marrow of his bones. To shake off the monotonous impression, he rose to look for a book amongst the old tattered volumes, hoping that he might find something that would sufficiently lay hold of him to change the current of his thoughts. There was an old volume of Peregrine Pickle, a book of sermons, half an army list of 1774, and the 7 Champions of Christendom. Philip took up this last, which he had never seen before. In it he read how Sir Guy, Earl of Warwick, went to fight the Paynim in his own country, and was away for 7 long years. And when he came back, his own wife Phyllis, the countess in her castle, did not know the poor travel-worn hermit, who came daily to seek his dole of bread at her hands, along with many beggars and much poor. But at last, when he lay a-dying in his cave in the rock, he sent for her by a secret sign known but to them twain, and she came with great speed, for she knew it was her Lord who had sent for her, and they had many sweet and holy words together before he gave up the ghost, his head lying on her bosom. The old story, known to most people from their childhood, was all new and fresh to Philip. He did not quite believe in the truth of it, because the fictitious nature of the histories of some of the other champions of Christendom was too patent. But he could not help thinking that this one might be true, and that Guy and Phyllis might have been as real flesh and blood long, long ago as he and Sylvia had even been. The old room, the quiet moonlit quadrangle into which the cross-barred casement looked, the quaint aspect of everything that he had seen for weeks and weeks, all this predisposed Philip to dwell upon the story he had just been reading as a faithful legend of 2 lovers whose bones were long since dust. He thought that if he could thus see Sylvia, himself unknown, unseen, could live at her gates, so to speak, and gaze upon her and his child, some day too, when he lay a-dying, he might send for her, and in soft words of mutual forgiveness breathe his life away in her arms. Or perhaps, and so he lost himself, and from thinking passed on to dreaming. All night long Guy and Phyllis, Sylvia and his child, passed in and out of his visions. It was impossible to make the fragments of his dreams cohere, but the impression made upon him by them was not the less strong for this. He felt as if he were called to Monkshaven, wanted at Monkshaven, and to Monkshaven he resolved to go, although when his reason overtook his feeling, he knew perfectly how unwise it was to leave a home of peace and tranquillity and surrounding friendliness, to go to a place where nothing but want and wretchedness awaited him, unless he made himself known, and if he did, a deeper want, a more woeful wretchedness would in all probability be his portion. In the small oblong of looking-glass hung against the wall, Philip caught the reflection of his own face and laughed scornfully at the sight. The thin hair lay upon his temples in the flakes that betoken long ill health. His eyes were the same as ever, and they had always been considered the best feature in his face, but they were sunk in their orbits and looked hollow and gloomy. As for the lower part of his face, blackened, contracted, drawn away from his teeth, the outline entirely changed by the breakage of his jawbone, he was indeed a fool if he thought himself fit to go forth to win back that love which Sylvia had forsworn. As a hermit and a beggar he must return to Monkshaven, and fall perforce into the same position which Guy of Warwick had only assumed. But still he should see his Phyllis, and might feast his sad, hopeless eyes from time to time with the sight of his child. His small pension of 6pence a day would keep him from absolute want of necessaries. So that very day he went to the warden and told him he thought of giving up his share in the bequest of Sir Simon Bray. Such a relinquishment had never occurred before in all the warden's experience, and he was very much inclined to be offended. I must say that for a man not to be satisfied as a beadsman of St. Sepulchre's argues a very wrong state of mind, and a very ungrateful heart. I'm sure, sir, it's not from any ingratitude, for I can hardly feel thankful to you and to Sir Simon and to Madam and the young ladies and all my comrades in the hospital, and I never expect to be either so comfortable or so peaceful again. But, what can you have to say against the place, then? Not but what there are always plenty of applicants for every vacancy, only I thought I was doing a kindness to a man out of Harry's company. And you'll not see Harry either. He's got his leave in March." "I'm very sorry. I should like to have seen the lieutenant again, but I cannot rest any longer so far away from people I once knew. 10 to 1 they're dead or removed or something or other by this time, and it'll serve you right if they are. Mind, no one can be chosen twice to be a beadsman of St. Sepulchre's." The warden turned away, and Philip, uneasy at staying, disheartened at leaving, went to make his few preparations for setting out once more on his journey northwards. He had to give notice of his change of residence to the local distributor of pensions, and 1 or 2 farewells had to be taken, with more than usual sadness at the necessity, for Philip, under his name of Stephen Freeman, had attached some of the older beadsmen a good deal to him, from his unselfishness, his willingness to read to them, and to render them many little services, and perhaps as much as anything, by his habitual silence, which made him a convenient recipient of all their garrulousness. So before the time for his departure came, he had the opportunity of one more interview with the warden, of a more friendly character than that in which he gave up his beadsmanship. And so far it was well, and Philip turned his back upon St. Sepulchre's with his sore heart partly healed by his 4 months' residence there. He was stronger, too, in body, more capable of the day-after-day walks that were required of him. He had saved some money from his allowance as beadsman and from his pension, and might occasionally have taken an outside place on a coach, had it not been that he shrank from the first look of every stranger upon his disfigured face. Yet the gentle, wistful eyes and the white and faultless teeth always did away with the first impression as soon as people became a little acquainted with his appearance. It was February when Philip left St. Sepulchre's. It was the first week in April when he began to recognize the familiar objects between York and Monkshaven, and now he began to hang back and to question the wisdom of what he had done, just as the warden had prophesied that he would. The last night of his 200-mile walk, he slept at the little inn at which he had been enlisted nearly 2 years before. It was by no intention of his that he rested at that identical place. Night was drawing on, and in making, as he thought, a short cut, he had missed his way, and was fain to seek shelter where he might find it. But it brought him very straight face to face with his life at that time, and ever since. His mad, wild hopes, half the result of intoxication, as he now knew, all dead and gone. The career then freshly opening, shut up against him now. His youthful strength and health changed into premature infirmity, and the home and the love that should have opened wide its doors to console him for all, why, in 2 years death might have been busy, and taken away from him his last feeble chance of the faint happiness of seeing his beloved without being seen or known of her. All that night and all the next day, the fear of Sylvia's possible death overclouded his heart. It was strange that he had hardly ever thought of this before, so strange that now, when the terror came, it took possession of him, and he could almost have sworn that she must be lying dead in Monkshaven churchyard. Or was it little Bella, that blooming, lovely babe, whom he was never to see again? There was the tolling of mournful bells in the distant air to his disturbed fancy, and the cry of the happy birds, the plaintive beating of the new-dropped lambs, were all omens of evil import to him. As well as he could, he found his way back to Monkshaven, over the wild heights and moors he had crossed on that black day of misery. Why he should have chosen that path he could not tell. It was as if he were led, and had no free will of his own. The soft, clear evening was drawing on, and his heart beat thick and then stopped, only to start again with fresh violence. There he was at the top of the long, steep lane that was in some parts a literal staircase leading down from the hilltop into the high street, through the very entry up which he had passed when he shrank away from his former and his then present life. There he stood, looking down once more at the numerous irregular roofs, the many stacks of chimneys below him, seeking out that which had once been his own dwelling. Who dwelt there now? The yellower gleams grew narrower, the evening shadows broader, and Philip crept down the lane a weary, woeful man. At every gap in the close-packed buildings he heard the merry music of a band, the cheerful sound of excited voices. Still he descended slowly, scarcely wondering what it could be, for it was not associated in his mind with the one pervading thought of Sylvia. When he came to the angle of junction between the lane and the high street, he seemed plunged all at once into the very center of the bustle, and he drew himself up into a corner of deep shadow, from whence he could look out upon the street. A circus was making its grand entry into Monkshaven, with all the pomp of color and of noise that it could muster. Trumpeters in party-colored clothes rode first, blaring out triumphant discord. Next came a gold and scarlet chariot drawn by 6 piebald horses, and the windings of this team through the tortuous, narrow street were pretty enough to look upon. In the chariot sate kings and queens, heroes and heroines, or what were meant for such. All the little boys and girls running alongside of the chariot envied them, but they themselves were very much tired and shivering with cold in their heroic pomp of classic clothing. All this Philip might have seen, did see, in fact, but heeded not one jot. Almost opposite to him, not 10 yards apart, standing on the raised step at the well-known shop door, was Sylvia, holding a child, a merry dancing child, up in her arms to see the show. She too, Sylvia, was laughing for pleasure, and for sympathy with pleasure. She held the little Bella aloft that the child might see the gaudy procession the better and the longer, looking at it herself with red lips apart and white teeth glancing through. Then she turned to speak to someone behind her, Coulson, as Philip saw the moment afterwards. His answer made her laugh once again. Philip saw it all, her bonny, careless looks, her pretty, matronly form, her evident ease of mind and prosperous outward circumstances. The years that he had spent in gloomy sorrow, amongst wild scenes, on land or by sea, his life in frequent peril of a bloody end, had gone by with her like sunny days, all the more sunny because he was not there. So bitterly thought the poor disabled marine, as weary and despairing he stood in the cold shadow, and looked upon the home that should have been his haven, the wife that should have welcomed him, the child that should have been his comfort. He had banished himself from his home. His wife had forsworn him. His child was blossoming into intelligence unwitting of any father. Wife and child and home were all doing well without him. What madness had tempted him thither? An hour ago, like a fanciful fool, he had thought she might be dead, dead with sad penitence for her cruel words at her heart, with mournful wonder at the unaccounted-for absence of her child's father preying on her spirits, and in some measure causing the death he had apprehended. But to look at her there where she stood, it did not seem as if she had had an hour's painful thought in all her blooming life. "I go into the warm hearth, mother and child, now the gay cavalcade has gone out of sight, and the chill of night has succeeded to the sun's setting. Husband and father, steal out into the cold, dark street, and seek some poor, cheap lodging, where you may rest your weary bones, and cheat your more weary heart into forgetfulness in sleep. The pretty story of the Countess Phyllis, who mourned for her husband's absence so long, is a fable of old times, or rather say Earl Guy never wedded his wife, knowing that one she loved better than him was alive all the time she had believed him to be dead. End of chapter 42.